The room fell silent before the statement had even ended. Senior royals who had faced wars of public opinion and decades of scandal sat frozen as a single sentence changed everything. Buckingham's private apartments had been willed exclusively to Princess Charlotte, not to the heir, not to the reigning monarch, to Charlotte. The shock wasn't just legal, it was deeply personal, and what followed would expose fractures the palace had fought for years to conceal. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. The announcement had been delivered with the usual polished restraint, a carefully measured tone that betrayed nothing of the earthquake it would trigger. Yet beneath that calm delivery, a tremor moved through the royal household. Advisors glanced at one another in disbelief. Senior members of the family, accustomed to protocol and predictability, found themselves blindsided by a revelation they had not been warned about. This was no minor adjustment to a trust, no ceremonial redistribution of property. Buckingham's private apartments are not merely rooms behind guarded doors, they are the inner sanctum of royal life, the symbolic heart of authority and continuity. To assign them solely to Charlotte was to send a message, one that many struggled to decipher in real time. Whispers spread almost immediately. Some questioned whether there had been an oversight, a misunderstanding in phrasing. Others sensed something far more deliberate. The monarchy is built on hierarchy, on a chain of inheritance that is rarely disrupted without consequence. To bypass traditional expectations felt unprecedented, even destabilizing. It stirred emotions that could not be voiced publicly, feelings of betrayal, confusion, and in some corners, quiet resentment. For generations, such spaces had represented not only residence, but influence. Whoever controls proximity to the palace's most private quarters holds more than keys. They hold access, discretion, and symbolic power. And now that power had been directed toward a young princess whose future, until this moment, had followed a far more predictable path. As the implications sank in, murmurs of a hidden clause began to surface. Insiders hinted that this provision had not been drafted recently. It had been embedded years ago, perhaps during a period of internal uncertainty when the stability of the institution felt fragile. If that was true, then this was not an impulsive act of affection or favoritism. It was strategy, a calculated safeguard designed long before today's announcement. The idea that such a clause existed and had been kept so tightly sealed only deepened the sense of shock. Who had known? Who had approved it? And why had even high-ranking figures remained unaware until now? What made the revelation so explosive was not just the transfer of property, but the emotional undercurrent it unleashed. Duty and inheritance have always been intertwined within the royal family, yet they do not always align with personal expectations. For some, this decision felt like a quiet endorsement of Charlotte's significance within the monarchy's long-term vision. For others, it felt like a disruption of balance, a signal that old assumptions could no longer be relied upon. The palace has weathered scandals before, but this was different. This was internal. This struck at the architecture of succession itself. Behind closed doors, urgent conversations began unfolding. Advisors scrambled to assess the constitutional implications, while family members grappled with what this meant for their own positions. The public would soon demand explanations, but inside the institution the questions were far more personal. Was this a gesture of protection, a strategic repositioning, or the first move in a larger transformation of royal power? The weight of history pressed heavily on every reaction, because in a monarchy defined by continuity, even a single unexpected clause can reshape the narrative for decades. And so, as the formal statement concluded, and the silence stretched just a little too long, the realization settled in that this moment would not fade quietly. It would ripple outward, altering relationships and expectations in ways no one had fully anticipated. But as the initial shock settled into uneasy silence, one question echoed through every gilded corridor: why Charlotte? And why now? Long before the cameras flashed and the headlines exploded, a quiet document had been drafted, its ink dry, its intent buried beneath layers of protocol. This wasn't a last-minute act of sentiment. It was deliberate, calculated, inscribed at a time when the monarchy faced its most fragile crossroads. Whoever authored the clause knew it would detonate like a time bomb, and they knew exactly who would feel the blast most deeply. The origins of that clause trace back to a period of private constitutional review, a moment when senior figures quietly reassessed the architecture of the crown itself. Publicly, the institution projected stability. Privately, it wrestled with questions about relevance, succession, and survival in a rapidly changing world. It was during those guarded discussions, insiders now suggest, that the seed of this decision was planted. The review was never meant for broad awareness. Only a tight circle of legal minds and trusted advisors were invited to examine vulnerabilities within the royal framework. They explored what would happen if tradition failed to inspire the next generation, if hierarchy alone no longer commanded loyalty. In that atmosphere of strategic anxiety, the clause granting Buckingham's private apartments solely to Princess Charlotte was drafted, not as a reward, not as a gesture of affection, but as a safeguard, a quiet recalibration of influence designed to anchor the monarchy's future in someone who symbolized renewal. Why was it sealed from most of the royal household? Because knowledge is power, and this clause was pure where to disclose it prematurely could have ignited rivalries before the timing was right. The monarchy thrives on controlled revelation. This was control in its most disciplined form. Even high-ranking members were kept unaware, ensuring that when the announcement finally came, it would carry the full force of inevitability. There would be no time to lobby, no room to negotiate. The document's language, according to those who have studied it, was airtight, crafted with precision, shielded by layers of legal reinforcement that make reversal nearly impossible without public constitutional upheaval. Speculation quickly turned toward motive. Was this about future stability? About insulating a new generation from the political and emotional storms that had battered their predecessors? The emotional undertone of the clause suggests protection rather than preference. Charlotte was not chosen to elevate her above others in affection, but to position her at the center of continuity. By granting her exclusive control over Buckingham's private apartments, the architects of this decision may have sought to create a secure operational base for the monarchy's evolving identity. It was not just about walls and corridors. It was about influence, autonomy, and the subtle reshaping of internal power structures. Senior advisors, reportedly stunned by the clarity of the wording, recognized immediately what this meant. The clause did more than assign property. It redistributed leverage. Control over private palace space translates into access, discretion, and symbolic authority. In royal dynamics, proximity often defines influence. By anchoring that proximity to Charlotte, the monarchy quietly signaled a shift that few had anticipated. This was not inheritance in the traditional sense. It was strategic positioning. And as the implications of this buried provision continue to surface, the deeper reality becomes impossible to ignore. This clause was designed to future-proof the crown, but in doing so, it has unsettled the present. Because if it was meant to protect the monarchy, its immediate consequences suggest something far more combustible. And if the clause was meant to protect the monarchy, its immediate consequences suggested it might instead ignite its most volatile chapter yet. As heir to the throne, Prince William had been raised to understand duty above all else. Yet this revelation didn't just challenge protocol, it struck at the core of legacy itself. Insiders claim the news reached him moments before the public announcement, leaving no time to prepare. For the first time in years, the future king reportedly found himself questioning whether the institution he would one day lead was shifting beneath his feet. The weight of that realization was not theatrical. It was deeply personal. For a man conditioned to anticipate every constitutional ripple, this felt like standing on ground that had quietly moved without warning. On one level, there was pride. Charlotte is his daughter, a child he has guided with steady intention, teaching her both compassion and composure. To see her entrusted with something so symbolically powerful could stir any father's heart. But William is not just a father. He is the heir, and heirs are trained to measure emotion against responsibility. The apartments at Buckingham are not sentimental heirlooms, they are instruments of influence. Granting them solely to Charlotte risked signaling a reordering of internal gravity, and William understood how quickly perception can become political reality. Advisors reportedly urged restraint, remain composed, offer public support, frame the narrative around continuity and confidence. The crown survives on unity, not visible hesitation, yet behind the carefully managed response. So, sources suggest there were difficult conversations about optics. Would the public interpret this as favoritism? Would critics accuse the monarchy of privileging one child over established lines of expectation? The institution has spent years defending its relevance in a modern world that questions inherited power. This decision, bold as it was, could either reinforce its evolution or reopen old wounds about fairness and hierarchy. There was also the delicate matter of father and daughter. Charlotte, still young, could not fully grasp the constitutional tremor attached to her name. Yet, the scrutiny would not spare her. Every gesture, every future appearance, would now be filtered through the lens of this inheritance. William faced an emotional paradox: protect her innocence while preparing her for intensified attention. The apartments were more than rooms, they were a spotlight, and once that light is fixed, it rarely dims. Within palace corridors, whispers of strategic recalibration began to circulate. If Charlotte's role was subtly expanding, what did that mean for long-term planning? Would future responsibilities be reshaped around this decision? Some insiders believe William had at least partial awareness of the clause's existence, though perhaps not its timing. His composed public demeanor hinted at more than shock. It suggested calculation, a recognition that resisting the clause would fracture unity, while embracing it might grant him influence over how the narrative unfolds. History weighs heavily on royal heirs. Past inheritance disputes have left scars, moments when personal expectation collided with institutional necessity. William knows those lessons intimately. The monarchy endures not by avoiding change, but by absorbing it without breaking. Still, absorption comes at a cost, and in quiet moments, the future king may have confronted a difficult truth. Leadership sometimes means surrendering personal certainty for the sake of a broader design. As discussions continued behind closed doors, William's role shifted from stunned recipient of news to steady architect of response. He would not allow visible discord to define this chapter, yet the tension remained, subtle but undeniable. The decision had altered the emotional landscape of his family, and even the strongest foundations feel different after a tremor. But while William wrestled with restraint, another generation watched with a mixture of awe and uncertainty. Princess Charlotte had always carried herself with quiet confidence, but no one imagined she would become the epicenter of such a seismic shift. At just her young age, she was suddenly positioned not merely as a royal child, but as the sole beneficiary of Buckingham's most private sanctuary. What did this mean for her future role? And more importantly, what did it signal about the monarchy's evolving priorities? The announcement transformed her from a beloved young princess into a symbol of deliberate change. In a family defined by tradition, symbolism is never accidental, and placing Charlotte at the center of this decision felt like a message written in bold, unmistakable ink. Those who have watched her grow often speak of a maturity that seems to exceed her years. Composed in public, observant in private, she has been raised with an awareness that her life is not entirely her own. From an early age, she has been taught to balance warmth with restraint, confidence with humility. Yet no amount of preparation could fully shield her from the magnitude of this inheritance. The apartments at Buckingham are not simply elegant quarters tucked behind historic walls. They represent access to the monarchy's inner pulse. To entrust them to Charlotte alone signals faith not only in her character, but in her potential to embody the crown's future direction. The symbolism runs deeper still. For centuries, succession narratives have revolved primarily around male heirs and rigid hierarchies. While modern reforms have softened some of those lines, the cultural memory of tradition remains powerful. Granting Charlotte exclusive control over such a storied space subtly reshapes that narrative. It places a young royal woman at the forefront of influence, not as an afterthought, but as a deliberate focal point. This is not merely about property, it is about redefining the architecture of expectation. In doing so, The monarchy appears to be acknowledging that its strength may lie in adaptation rather than repetition. Yet with symbolism comes weight. The public gaze, already intense, has sharpened. Every appearance, every gesture now carries layered interpretation. For a child still discovering her identity, this shift introduces emotional pressure that cannot be ignored. Admiration can be as heavy as criticism. Support can quickly morph into scrutiny. The very act meant to empower her could also complicate her path, placing adult responsibility upon young shoulders. It is a paradox the monarchy knows well. Elevation often arrives intertwined with sacrifice. Speculation has also turned toward mentorship. Senior female figures within the royal family may quietly guide Charlotte through this transition, offering counsel shaped by their own experiences of expectation and endurance. If the apartments become more than a residence, if they evolve into a future operational base of influence, Charlotte will require both resilience and wisdom. The clause granting her autonomy suggests she will not simply occupy the space, she may one day shape it. That possibility hints at a broader transformation unfolding behind palace doors. For now, Charlotte remains poised, her role still unfolding. But the inheritance has altered the trajectory of her journey. It suggests that her future may not mirror conventional royal pathways. Instead, it may carve a new route, one defined by independence, strategic positioning, and symbolic leadership, long before formal titles shift. The monarchy rarely makes gestures without layered intention. This one feels particularly deliberate. As public admiration swells, presenting Charlotte as a beacon of modern continuity, the deeper consequences continue to ripple outward. Because while many celebrate this bold repositioning, not everyone within the extended royal circle sees it as seamless progress. And beneath the polished surface of unity, subtle tensions continue to stir. Yet admiration from the public could not quiet the private unrest building among extended members of the royal circle. Behind polished smiles and carefully choreographed appearances, tensions reportedly flared. Some family members believed the decision disrupted a delicate balance that had held for generations. Others feared it was a sign of shifting alliances within palace walls. What had once been a united front began to fracture into guarded conversations and closed-door meetings, each echoing with unspoken accusations. The monarchy has always presented solidarity as its shield, but this time, the strain felt harder to conceal. The inheritance of Buckingham's private apartments was no longer a symbolic gesture. It had become a fault line running straight through the heart of the family. Emergency gatherings were convened with unusual urgency. Voices remained controlled, but beneath measured tones lay sharp undercurrents. Some questioned whether precedent had been recklessly overturned. If one foundational expectation could be rewritten, what else might follow? The monarchy's endurance depends on predictability, on an unbroken chain of tradition that reassures both insiders and the public. This decision, bold as it appeared, unsettled that rhythm. It suggested that even the most established assumptions could be revised without warning. For certain relatives, that realization carried an unmistakable sting. The emotional toll rippled quietly through sibling and cousin relationships. While no one openly challenged Charlotte's worthiness, whispers lingered about fairness and foresight. Was this a sign that influence was being quietly consolidated around a smaller inner circle? Were some branches of the family being subtly sidelined? In institutions built on hierarchy, perception can wound more deeply than policy. Even those who outwardly supported the clause felt its implications tightening around their own futures. Success for one member can unintentionally magnify uncertainty for others. Advisors, too, were divided. Some defended the move as visionary, a decisive act of modernization meant to fortify the crown for decades ahead. Others privately questioned the timing, warning that such a dramatic redistribution of symbolic power might ignite resentment that could smolder for years. Behind briefing notes and carefully drafted statements, debates intensified. The clause's legal strength meant it could not easily be undone. That finality only heightened the tension. There would be no simple reversal, no quiet compromise to restore comfort. Rumors of subtle power blocks began to circulate. Not overt alliances, but quiet alignments of perspective and loyalty. Certain members leaned into the narrative of renewal, while others retreated into guarded skepticism. The monarchy's greatest strength has always been its ability to project unity, even during private discord. Yet maintaining that facade requires discipline, and discipline becomes harder when emotions run high. Every public appearance now carried a dual meaning: what was shown to the world, and one hat remained unspoken beneath it. The contrast between the smiling photographs and the tense discussions behind palace doors grew sharper by the day. Applause for Charlotte's empowerment echoed beyond the gates, while inside, unease simmered. Loyalty, once assumed, now required reaffirmation. The inheritance had not only shifted property, it had shifted trust. Some felt invigorated by the boldness of the move. Others felt blindsided. And in the fragile ecosystem of royal dynamics, even subtle shifts can trigger lasting consequences. What made the situation especially volatile was the sense that this might not be the final revelation. If such a significant clause had remained hidden for years, what else might be sealed within private documents? That question lingered like a shadow over every conversation. Because when tradition is disrupted once, it becomes easier to imagine further departures from expectation. And as uncertainty spread quietly through the extended family, the realization dawned that this internal rift might soon intersect with something far more unpredictable. As internal fractures widened, the outside world reacted with a force no one inside the palace could fully control. The headlines were relentless. Social media erupted. Some hailed the move as progressive, a bold statement about the monarchy's future. Others condemned it as favoritism cloaked in tradition. For every voice celebrating Charlotte's empowerment, another questioned the motives behind the decision. The palace, accustomed to managing narratives, suddenly found itself chasing one. What had begun as an internal shockwave now exploded into a global debate, pulling the monarchy into a storm it could neither silence nor fully steer. Supporters framed the inheritance as a decisive leap into modernity. They argued that placing such symbolic authority in the hands of a young princess reflected a crown willing to evolve, willing to elevate competence and promise over rigid expectation. To them, Charlotte represented renewal, an image of continuity reshaped for a changing world. Across international media, commentators described the decision as a masterstroke, a subtle recalibration designed to keep the institution relevant in an era that demands adaptability. In this narrative, the monarchy was not clinging to tradition, it was rewriting it, yet critics were just as vocal. Some accused the palace of disguising internal favoritism as visionary reform. They questioned why such a profound shift had been concealed for years, why transparency had not accompanied strategy. In a climate where inherited privilege already faces scrutiny, the optics were combustible. If the monarchy sought to present unity and fairness, this clause risked appearing selective, even exclusionary. Debate panels dissected the implications. Columnists speculated about hidden motives. The conversation grew louder by the hour. Constitutional experts weighed in with cautious fascination. They examined the legal framework that made the clause nearly untouchable. Historians drew parallels to past moments when royal decisions had quietly reshaped the institution's trajectory. Some praised the foresight embedded within the document's language. Others warned that bold reforms, when unveiled abruptly, can unsettle the very stability they intend to secure. The analysis was layered, but the underlying theme remained clear. This was no ordinary inheritance. It was a signal. Media scrutiny intensified around internal palace transparency. Why had senior members reportedly been unaware? Was secrecy necessary for strategic protection, or did it expose fractures in governance? The palace released carefully measured statements, emphasizing continuity and confidence, yet each clarification seemed to spark new questions. In the digital age, narrative control is fragile. Every silence invites speculation. Every measured response becomes material for interpretation. For Charlotte, the impact was immediate and far-reaching. Her global image transformed overnight. Admirers viewed her as a symbol of empowered youth within an ancient institution. Skeptics cast her as an unwitting participant in a calculated maneuver. The weight of public projection settled upon her young shoulders. In celebrating her elevation, the world also intensified its gaze. Success and scrutiny arrived together. Inseparable. Perhaps most intriguing was the rising speculation about additional undisclosed provisions. If one powerful clause had remained hidden for so long, what else might rest quietly within sealed documents? The question fueled endless conjecture. Commentators began to wonder whether this inheritance marked the beginning of a broader restructuring yet to be revealed. And as public perception continued to evolve, one reality became impossible to ignore: how the monarchy responds to this moment could shape its strategy for years ahead. Because in the modern era, perception is not merely commentary, it is influence. And as the palace navigated praise and criticism in equal measure, the understanding grew that public reaction might quietly steer future decisions. Yet, amid the public storm, one quiet detail in the will hinted at an even deeper, more startling implication. Buried in the formal language of the will was a clause that few noticed at first, until insiders began whispering about its true significance. It wasn't just ownership. It was autonomy. Control over the apartment's future use, access, and renovations rested solely with Charlotte. In royal terms, that level of authority was extraordinary, and it suggested this inheritance was less about property and more about independence. The revelation reframed everything. What initially appeared to be a symbolic gesture of trust now looked like a deliberate transfer of operational power, wrapped carefully in dignified phrasing. The autonomy clause granted Charlotte discretion that traditionally would have required layers of advisory approval. Decisions about access, restoration, internal arrangements matters that usually pass through committees and seasoned courtiers were, according to the wording, hers alone to influence. For a monarchy built upon consultation and hierarchy, that was seismic. It bypassed customary oversight, creating a rare pocket of self-determined authority within the palace structure. Those who understand royal mechanics immediately grasped the significance. This was not ceremonial. It was functional. Controlling private palace space carries strategic advantage. Within those apartments, proximity translates into influence. Invitations extended or withheld, meetings convened or deferred, renovations that reshape internal geography, each subtle choice can recalibrate the rhythm of royal interaction. Space defines access, and access defines power. By anchoring that discretion to Charlotte, the monarchy quietly repositioned a center of gravity. It may not be visible to the public eye, but inside the institution, the implications resonate loudly. Emotionally, the symbolism is profound. Independence within monarchy is rare and carefully rationed. Young royals are typically guided step by step, their roles expanding gradually under seasoned supervision. Granting Charlotte this degree of operational autonomy signals confidence in her future agency. It portrays her not merely as a beneficiary of tradition, but as a participant in shaping it. That distinction carries weight. It transforms her narrative from passive inheritance to active stewardship. Yet with independence comes unease. Some within the extended circle reportedly view this shift as subtle but decisive. If Charlotte holds a domain beyond conventional advisory influence, what precedent does that establish? Will other roles be recalibrated to reflect similar autonomy, or is this a singular exception designed for a unique moment? The uncertainty unsettles those who rely on established boundaries. Power within monarchy is often less about titles and more about access. Adjust access, and you quietly adjust authority. Speculation has also turned toward long-term constitutional implications. While the clause does not alter the line of succession, it does reshape the internal landscape through which that succession will unfold. Future decisions may orbit around the space she controls. Strategic discussions, alliances, and informal negotiations could gradually gravitate toward her sphere. Even if unintended, the autonomy embedded in the will has potential to accelerate her influence sooner than tradition might have predicted. The deeper analysts are beginning to connect the dots. The clause was drafted years ago, during a period of introspection about stability and renewal. Now, as its full meaning surfaces, it appears less like a protective measure and more like a catalyst, The monarchy has always evolved through quiet adjustments, rather than dramatic proclamations. This feels like one of those adjustments subtle in language, monumental in consequence. As observers peel back the layers, one truth becomes increasingly clear. This inheritance is not static, it is dynamic. It creates new possibilities while unsettling old certainties. And as Charlotte grows into the authority quietly placed within her reach, the ripple effects may extend far beyond the apartments themselves. Because once autonomy is granted within such a historic institution, it rarely remains confined to its original scope. And, as the layers of the decision continued to unfold, the monarchy faced a reality it could no longer ignore. What began as a shocking inheritance has become something far larger, a symbolic turning point in royal history. The decision to will Buckingham's apartments solely to Princess Charlotte was never just about walls or windows. It was about the direction of the crown itself, a signal that the monarchy is evolving perhaps faster than some are ready to accept. In the span of a single announcement, the institution that prides itself on continuity revealed a willingness to redraw its own internal map. And that willingness carries consequences that stretch far beyond one generation. At its core, this moment represents a generational shift. The monarchy has long depended on a delicate balance between reverence for tradition and quiet adaptation, but rarely has that adaptation been so pointed, so personal. By anchoring symbolic authority to Charlotte, the crown appears to be investing in the future with uncommon clarity. It is a gesture that speaks to renewal, to resilience, and to the understanding that survival in a modern era requires more than ceremony. It requires repositioning. The apartments, once seen merely as private quarters, have become a statement of intent. Charlotte now stands as a bridge between eras. On one side lies centuries of protocol, expectation, and inherited structure. On the other stands a world demanding transparency, inclusivity, and relevance. Her elevation into this sphere of autonomy suggests that the monarchy is not simply preparing her for ceremonial duties, it is preparing her to embody transformation. That duality, tradition intertwined with progress, defines the tension of this chapter. She represents continuity, yet she also represents change. And in that paradox lies the future of the crown. For senior royals, this shift has prompted a quiet reckoning. NG. Legacy is not merely about titles passed down, it is about influence sustained across time. Some have reportedly confronted difficult questions about how their own roles fit within this recalibrated landscape. What does stewardship look like when authority is subtly redistributed? How does one honor tradition while accepting evolution? These are not questions answered in public statements. They unfold privately, in reflective conversations and strategic reassessments. The emotional undertone is unmistakable. Pride mingled with uncertainty. Strategically, the reshaping of influence within palace grounds is already underway. Control of private space translates into control of access, and access shapes dialogue. Meetings that once orbited around established centers may gradually shift. Decisions may be informed by new voices positioned closer to Charlotte's sphere. It is a quiet realignment, not announced with fanfare, but felt in subtle adjustments. The monarchy has always understood that power does not only reside in crowns or proclamations, it resides in proximity, in discretion, in who gathers where and why. Speculation continues to swirl that this may not be the final revelation. If one clause carried such transformative weight, what other provisions remain concealed within carefully guarded archives? The institution rarely unveils its full strategy at once. More shifts could follow, incremental, calculated, each reinforcing the narrative of generational renewal. Observers are watching closely, aware that history often identifies turning points only in hindsight, and this feels unmistakably like one. How will history judge this moment? As visionary foresight or risky deviation? As bold leadership or calculated gamble? The answer will depend on what unfolds next. If Charlotte grows into the autonomy granted to her with confidence and wisdom, this decision may be remembered as the spark that secured the crown's relevance for decades. If internal tensions intensify, it could be cited as the beginning of deeper transformation. Either way, the inheritance has transcended its material form. It has become a symbol. And symbols, within monarchy, carry immense power. They shape perception. They influence loyalty. They define eras. This was never just about property. It was about positioning the future within reach of a new generation. Even if that reach unsettles the present, the crown has stepped into uncharted territory with deliberate resolve. Now, the world waits to see what path unfolds from here. Because in the monarchy, nothing is ever just an inheritance, and the true consequences of this decision may only be starting to unfold. Thanks for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in next one.